I forgot, I need to mention just a couple of other things. First of all, my name is Ed Carter. I'm the director of the School of Communications here at BYU. I'd like to recognize Dean Ed Adams from the College of Fine Arts and Communications, and also Ray Beckham. And let me just tell you a little bit about Ray, although he'll be embarrassed and not want us to say anything about him. But Ray is a retired faculty member and administrator from BYU, is a professor emeritus of communications and taught advertising and public relations for 21 years. He served as director of development and public services for 5 years each, founded the Aspen Grove Family Camp, and worked for the Travel Studies Department, Evening School, and started the New York City internship program in the Department of Communications about 40 years ago. Ray has been awarded from BYU the Man of the Year, the Presidential Medal, and the Alumni Distinguished Service Award, among others. Has been a member of several church executive committees and served as a bishop, stake president, mission president, temple sealer, and in a temple presidency and a regional representative for the 12. He married Ida Lee Jackson in 1947, and the couple has 5 children, 19 grandchildren, 23 great-grandchildren. And following the passing of his wife, Ida Lee, in 1994, he married Jeanette Callister Hales, and we also appreciate her. She's not here today and is in another assignment. She's the former president of the Church General Young Women's Program, and she and her former husband, Robert H. Hales, have 5 children and 14 grandchildren. We're grateful to the Beckhams for establishing the fund that makes these lectures possible and for all their support of BYU and the School of Communications. So, Tom will now introduce our speaker for this morning.
Welcome, everyone. It's my great pleasure to introduce Ryan Elder, who's an assistant professor of marketing in the Marriott School of Management. Dr. Elder earned his PhD at the University of Michigan, which means that he has maybe some conflicting feelings going into this weekend, and he's in his 5th year here at BYU. His research examines how sensory experiences affect consumers' thoughts and behaviors, as well as how visual cues affect persuasion. He primarily explores these areas within the context of advertising and product packaging. His research has been published in the Journal of Consumer Research, the Journal of Marketing Research, and the Journal of Consumer Psychology, and he has been featured on Good Morning America, CBS This Morning, Time Magazine, the Huffington Post, CBS Radio, and others. He is married to the former Elizabeth Germany. They both served a mission together in Poland. Actually not together, because they weren't married yet. But subsequently met at a mission reunion, and they now have 6 children. So without further ado, here's Ryan Elder.
Thanks, Tom. Can you hear me? Is this mic is live? I don't see where the tech guy is. Okay, perfect. I can assure you, Tom, there's no conflict. I'm wearing maize to Michigan Stadium. I'm cheering for a blue, but it is not BYU blue. So I have certain allegiances. Mike Bond told me not to say that. I said it anyway. Go blue. Okay, so as Tom mentioned in my introduction, a lot of my research is on the area of sensory marketing and cognition and sensory perception within advertising communications. And what I'm going to be talking about today is actually a lecture that I've been giving for the past 4 years in my advertising class to both the MBA students and to the undergrads. It's going to be built off of that. I'm going to be somewhat of a hybrid between Malcolm Gladwell sharing other people's research and insights, and maybe LeVar Burton giving a couple book reviews. But this is some really interesting area for research, and a lot of the stuff that you'll see will be on how do we engineer virality. So I'm coming from a business school. I think it's great that people share things, but I also think it's important to know from a company standpoint, how do I increase the likelihood of my message going forth? So this is what I'll be largely talking about today. A little bit of a lay of the land. Most of you are very familiar with this, I'm sure. But in terms of the primary social media networks, we have here Pinterest, you'll see is largely female. Those of you who use Pinterest, you know, you go to a website, and you pin something, you save it for later, you maybe get some ideas, inspirations for designing your children's bedroom. You might have some recipes that you want to cook a little bit later, primarily visual here. Twitter, we know, is really kind of this restricted text format where I'm giving you maybe my up-to-date, most important information like what time I went to bed last night. Something like that shows up usually in Twitter. The largest penetration is within the United States, but because it's had a lot of penetration, it's not growing as quickly as some of the others, obviously. Facebook we're all pretty familiar with, but I think what's interesting to note is 1 billion active users, and then the content, 2.5 billion pieces of content. So these are active users on average sharing 2.5 pieces of information each day. Pinterest is one, I think if you want to look at maybe the low cognitive resources, people who don't want to devote a lot of attention to their social media, they don't want to read, it's a good platform for that. A lot of pictures, a lot of videos, conveying information, and a lot of not Pinterest, Instagram. A lot of companies are jumping in on this and seeing how can they utilize this most effectively. Google Plus has largely been a case study in like how people don't adopt certain social networks, but 400 million active users, it is still something that is growing. You can see 925,000 new users every day. And then lastly, LinkedIn, which most of us are probably very familiar with. This is primarily a business networking site. Content is generated and shared through LinkedIn as well, primarily best business practices, ways to get a job, resume tips, etc. So that's kind of the lay of the land of what social media is or what's out there. But I'm going to open up this question is why do we use social media? What does it even do for us? Now, I know that we can't pass a mic around, but if you want to shout out an answer, I would love that interactive element. I'll repeat what you say. Yes?
Social media is a great tool for any basically business organization to not only create content, but to basically increase sales or whatever directive they have going on at the time. It can be used anywhere.
Perfect. So if I'm looking at it from a business standpoint, I might be maintaining this contact to ultimately drive a sale, or what you mentioned, whatever metric. If I have a different dependent variable, maybe I want perceptions to change about my company, and I can see that implemented. Well, why do we use social media just as people? So if you're not a company, why are you using social media? Yes, back here.
It's the new word of mouth.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, I don't call up my friend and tell them about something, but I post about it, and then they see it and they know about it.
Okay, perfect. So you might be sharing something where originally you would have to tell them in person, but you're sharing that piece of content now online. In fact, you guys know that if people share things that they probably shouldn't share, even if they were in person, they'll put that online, right? It seems like there's a level of abstraction that makes us feel comfortable sharing whatever we want. But it's really to maintain this type of a connection, to share something with someone else, to establish a relationship, and to keep that. That's similarly what we're looking at within businesses. So this is a way for us to engage with our consumers because we're not face-to-face very often with them. It's a way to engage and maintain these relationships, keep the contact, and then as you mentioned, ultimately driving sales. So there has to be some value for us to do this because we're devoting resources to it. We need to get something else back out of it. So if you're thinking about what do we get back out of it, one of the numbers that people like to throw around is how much is a Facebook fan worth? So not necessarily just a like on a post, but someone who's following your company on Facebook. Any ideas? Any guesses?
It depends.
That's a good answer, Jeff. I like that answer. That's usually the right answer. It depends. But let's say on average, if you're going across industries, and sometimes it's going to be more valuable, sometimes it's less, somebody throw out an actual number.
$2.
Yeah, it's more than that, Scott, but that's a good number too. $174 is what they've equated a Facebook fan to be worth in terms of the life of the consumer. So you can look at the paper. I'll put up, if you want to talk to me later about what resource that is, it's a number that gets argued a lot, right? Because how do you determine? A lot of it depends on what you're referring to. But still, something that's fairly valuable, $174. So then we start thinking about, all right, well, I'm a company, or a person if you'd rather, and I want to think about what type of content do I put up there? And I'm going to take this from the perspective of a company. But think about the friends that you don't like to follow on Facebook, but you can't unfollow. And the content that they share, right? People are sharing things about, hey, if you like this post, I get an extra $500 for Kim Kardashian, right? And you see that over and over and over again in your feed, and you really don't want to see something like that in your feed for that app. A lot of people are broadcasting. Companies do the same thing. Companies say, hey, I'm going to tell you all about how awesome I am. I'm going to tell you all about the sales that I'm having. I'm going to just feed you food that you don't really want to eat. I'm not engaging with you. I'm broadcasting. What you really want to be seeing as a company is, let's have this give and take. Let's start asking questions of the consumer. Let's see what they want to hear. Let's let them provide input. So Entenmann's, a bakery back east, did this really great case study on this. So basically what happened is one of the customers was really upset that they stopped selling banana nut muffins. And they're like, you can't stop selling banana nut muffins. Those are the best muffins that you have. I'm not coming to your store until you start selling them again. And so Entenmann's has this opportunity here. I have an engaged consumer, someone who is my advocate, hopefully, typically, but right now I'm in jeopardy of losing them. And so I have a couple of options, right? I can turn to them and say, you know what? Sales are terrible. I can't sell banana nut muffins. You like them, nobody else does, sorry. Right? Or I can give them an opportunity and say, you know what? We want to find out, do customers really like banana nut muffins? If we get 1,000 likes on this post, we'll start offering them to you. And that's ultimately what Entenmann's did. They found out, look, people don't like our banana nut muffins. That's why we stopped selling them. But they made this contact with the customer, and the customer now has buy-in. They say, you know what? They cared for me enough to actually reach out, ask the questions, and get my input. And this is a perfect place to do this. This is a one-to-one contact, or at least the perception from the consumer side is that this is a one-to-one interaction. So a great thing to do there, ask questions. As a company, follow the same golden rule that you have as individual consumers, right? Don't post something that you wouldn't want to read yourself. Make something that's engaging and make it native. So what native means, and native content is a concept within advertising that we see a lot, we hear a lot, it's emerging. This is basically, let's make our advertising look like the rest of the content that is on the web page or that's in the mobile platform. And so I want you to make it feel like this is something I should be seeing. So you take these two ads as an example. Adidas Outdoor is actually one of the companies that I follow on Instagram. My Wonderful Walls is one that I followed for a day so I could actually extract this beautiful picture. But you can see the difference between the two, right? This is native to what Instagram offers. This is a cool visual. This is something that I would like to see. It looks fun. This guy's Superman diving off of a waterfall. Over here, you have this hard sell saying you need to come in and buy. I don't want to see that. I'm not in the mood to see that when I'm surfing social media. Yes, we do ultimately need to tie this back to numbers, but there's a better way of doing this. Kind of the idea, there's a book written on this called Jab, 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 Right Hook. And the idea is, let's maintain this contact, but don't try to knock someone out every single time. Because if you do, you're going to lose them. Yeah, you probably will knock them out. And then lastly, Mindshare is this idea that I want to stay in front of the consumer, but if I'm not going to be talking about my sales all the time, I have to find something else to talk about. And I'm going to start talking about things that you like as the individual consumer. So if I am Omaha Steaks, I'm going to talk about steak every once in a while, but I'm also going to talk about golfing. And I'm also going to be talking about, hey, what are you doing with your backyard landscape? How do you improve that? Because I know these are the things that my consumer wants to talk about. So I'm going to build off of our commonality. And then ultimately, yes, I'm going to say, hey, we're running a special right now. We'd like you to order some more steaks. That's great, but do it at the right time. So just in general, the type of content that's getting shared out there, not necessarily just from businesses, but this is kind of an interesting figure. You look at June, and in June, lists are dominant. Why do you think that would be? Yeah, back here.
People have time to get stuff done.
Okay, people have time to get stuff done, so I'm going to create a list of things that I need to get done. What kind of list do you think these are in June? Okay, perfect. Kids are out of school. What are you going to do now? Here's 10 things to keep from going crazy while your kids are at home, or here's 10 vacations that you can go on for less than $500. That's what you primarily see in June. As you start moving through, you start seeing in October all of these what posts. Yeah, holiday what? Products. These are, hey, guess what's coming out in November? Which is why you start seeing this transition in November to why should you buy it? Let's create some justification as to what you're going to buy and why you're going to buy it. Now, this isn't obviously true of all of the shares, but if you're looking in a business context, this is largely what that's in reference to. So here's the kind of things that get shared. In fact, lists, for those of you who are faculty, know that this holds true really, really well. If I started off class by saying there are 3 ways, and then I just paused, you see everybody get out their pencils and they're waiting to write down what are these magical 3 ways. And then if I just say to say the word there, then they're going to be like, oh, but they're ready, right? You give a list and people think, because it's quantified, I should know it. So just as a quick thought exercise, what do you think is the most viral video ever, the most viewed video ever? That was, so we'll get to that. Charlie Bit My Finger was the highest I'll come back to that in a second. Yes. Yes. Gangnam Style. Was that what you were going to say? And was that what you were saying back there? Yeah, you were right.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style. Oppan Gangnam Style.
That was really the only audio clip that I wanted to share, and I didn't feel appropriate sharing the video clip, so you had that. How many times has Gangnam Style been shared? Or viewed, sorry, not shared, but viewed. Say that, Scott? 2 billion? It's a big number. Yeah, 2.4 billion times, Gangnam Style. And that Charlie Bit My Finger, so what's interesting to note is out of the top 30 most viewed YouTube videos ever, Gangnam Style is first. And then out of the other 30, 26 others are music videos. And there are 3 non-music videos, with Charlie Bit My Finger being the only one that's really just a video. So here's Charlie Bit My Finger if you haven't seen it. This kid's laugh is hilarious.
Ah! Ooh, ouch! Ouch! Ouch, Charlie! Ow! Charlie, that really hurt.
Okay, pretty awesome. So we have that as being one of the most viral normal videos, so not a music video ever. And if we're looking at how do we engineer virality, how do we actually get things to spread, and if you were just to take that as an example, okay, we know this got shared a lot. Why? What are some of the characteristics of that video that would get it to be shared? Yes? Okay, it is short, so the idea that I don't have to have a long attention span, I don't need to maintain viewership throughout a long period of time, means I'm more likely to get to the end and then more likely to share. Perfect. Okay, so it's this slice of life, right? That this is something that we can all relate to. This resonates with us. If you have kids, you've seen this 100 times before. You just didn't ever think it was funny because then they start crying and fighting afterwards, right? Yeah. Okay, that's true too. It is something that not only did we resonate with it, but it's a little bit different for us, so it's funnier because of that, right? And a lot of you laughed at the end. And humor is one of the underlying characteristics of things that get shared, right? So we think about the emotional reasons why things get shared, and how do we measure that? How do we see, okay, positive, it's great, people like it, they're smiling. Can we actually look at that within a lab setting or measure that before we go forward? One thing that we just got here in the marketing department, actually, marketing and global supply chain, is ours is a little bit more updated than this, but the idea here is this is facial emotion tracking. So what I'm going to show you is you'll see this guy through a video. This is the processed version of him. This is just the real video of him. And over here, you'll see that there are different emotions that are being calculated and tabulated. So you'll get to see, I'll kind of walk through this as a live example. If I can get to that little guy. You guys know a shortcut to push play on a... Yeah, let me do this. We'll do the old school version. Sorry about this. It does. Happens to all of us. Okay, now he should be moving, and hopefully this will come through. Okay, it's not showing at all. We'll maybe come back to this. Here's another version that hopefully will show on this. So.
The all new.
Oh, the video is not working at all. Okay.
That's nasty.
This is a video that one of my colleagues shared. I'm going to actually try and pull this back up. So forgive me for a second, but these are somewhat worthwhile videos to take a glance at. I should have checked the video beforehand, but I thought it would work. Okay, so let's take a look. I'll show you that other thing later, but here's the video of me and a colleague named Maria. Now, this is research done by Tallis Teixeira, who's at Harvard, and he was measuring what are some of the emotional reactions that we have to an advertising stimulus. You'll see here, this is Carl's Jr. It's a meant-to-be disgusting advertisement, which it is. And what he was doing is he was trying to calibrate. Do people think this is disgusting? And some people do think it's disgusting. But what happens is our emotional experiences aren't perfectly shared, right? You might think it's disgusting, but I think it's hilarious. So that's what ultimately happened here is I thought it was a little bit funnier than she did. You can watch the ad. Over here, this right bar showcases a negative emotional experience of disgust. The green bar is happiness. I don't have a bar because it's pretty obvious where I reside most of the video.
The all new. Carl Jr. All right, that's nasty. Yeah, cough it up. Big bite, man. Yeah. Jeez, watch that. Wow, is that a booger? Man. I'm seriously gonna throw up. Oh, okay. Oh. Oh, okay. I don't know. What are you looking at, man? Oh, there's way too much ketchup.
Okay. You can hear my mom laughing up front. I got my sense of humor from her. But you could see, like, I didn't show you the latter part. I started crying, laughing, and like all of my facial recognition was gone. He's like, my hand's in front of my face, and he shares this at Harvard, thinks it's hilarious, and then decided he wanted to share that with our colleagues at Michigan, so he's done that as well. But you can see that even though there's an emotional experience, it doesn't mean that it's going to be the same emotional experience all around. This is kind of the social glue that holds us together if we think people are going to experience it the same way. But if they don't, then we're actually missing the bar here. What's critical to note, but while one, yes, positive emotions get shared more than negative emotions, that isn't the most critical dimension for emotional experiences that leads to sharing. What is physiological arousal. So emotions like awe or excitement on this positive side, or anger or stress on a negative side, are more likely to get shared than something that would just be I'm satisfied or I'm depressed. I'll talk about that in a second. One way that you can experimentally showcase this, and this is by a paper published by Jonah Berger and a co-author, is if let's say I had maybe the first 5 rows, you come into the lab and I have you run on the treadmill for 5 minutes, and then the back set of rows, I have you come in and you don't run on the treadmill for 5 minutes. Then what I do is I have you sit in front of a computer and I let you read some content, and I say, hey, we'd like to see if you want to share this content. List as many people as you want to share this content with as you want on a text box. And what you find is those people who had just been running on the treadmill misattribute that physiological arousal that they're experiencing, that heightened heart rate, to the content. So, wow, this is really getting my heart going. I want to share this content. It's physiological arousal, not necessarily the valence. The content stayed the same. So here we have, this is what's called an affect grid. This is just one way of a respondent in a lab study. This is one that we use to click on. So if I said, how are you feeling right now? You should be able to click on one of these 81 different squares and indicate what's your emotional experience. What you find is this x-axis is less predictive of sharing than the y-axis. So as things move up from sleepiness up to a higher arousal state, that is what's likely to lead to sharing, more so than just the valence overall. And I have a personal experience with this. So this is the Hancock Center in Chicago. One of my favorite places to go, primarily because, one, you don't have to pay up to go up there like you did with the Sears Tower or the Willis Tower. Two, you can get drinks up there and just enjoy the city while you're just sitting up at the top. When people ask me what should they do in Chicago, this is one of the first things I say. Go up there, get some drinks. It's an amazing view. And in addition to the amazing view, something that you maybe wouldn't expect is there are thousands of spiders living on the outside of the building. So it's got this unique characteristic coupled with this physiological arousal or this awe experience, which makes this even more noteworthy. And I actually looked up how they get there. Some of them fly all the way across from Michigan, so they use their strands as almost kites, and they can go across an entire lake just getting cast up. And then some of them land on buildings, some of them just kind of work their way up the buildings. But if you go to Chicago and you go to the Hancock Center, look for the spiders. They're everywhere. Kind of ruins the view, but it kind of makes the view cooler. So emotion is one of the key things that we focus on in what gets shared, but also social currency. And this is the idea that I know something that you don't know, and that puts me in a higher standing than you. And it doesn't put me in a higher standing than you if you don't know that I know that, so I have to share it. So one of the examples, and a lot of these examples are coming from Contagious. It's a great book written by Jonah Berger, who's a professor at Wharton. One of the examples is Criff Dogs in New York City. Has anybody been there? So they have some pretty unique hot dogs. You can get one that's bacon wrapped with pineapple and teriyaki sauce, or you can get a breakfast one that's bacon wrapped. It's kind of a theme with a fried egg and some cheese. So you go to this restaurant, you eat it, and you notice that there's a phone booth on the side of this counter. And you can go into the phone booth, and there's a rotary dial. And if you dial a 2 on the number, someone picks up, and they say, hey, do you have a reservation? And you're like, yes. And they say, okay. And then they open the door, and you go in. You go into a secret bar behind this Criff Dogs that's called Please Don't Tell. Right? And so the idea here is, yes, it's a unique experience to get in there. And then once you get in there, the name is Please Don't Tell. Well, what's the first thing you do when someone says don't tell? You tell people, right? Because a secret's not worth anything to me if you don't know that I have a secret. Right? So that's the idea of this social currency, that we like to keep secrets. We also like remarkability. And this is one that my son is perfect at. This is his source of social currency with me, is he'll come up to me and he'll say something like, hey, Dad, do you know how many people the largest passenger ship can carry? I'm like, I have no idea. He'll be like, 6,000 people with 2,000 crew members. I'm like, great. And he's like, so now I'm smarter than you because you didn't know that one fact, right? That's my piece of social currency that kind of drives our relationship. And he does this all the time. His favorite books are like Guinness Book of World Records or like Ripley's Believe It or Not, because he gets those facts that he can share. It's all social currency, but we do that as well. So Snapple, capitalizing on this, beneath their facts, beneath their lids, which is usually wasted space, started putting some facts. So 111,111,111 squared is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a piece of information that's useless, but it does give you a little bit of a nugget of, hey, there's some social currency behind that. So you have a bunch of these. They actually have over 1,000 of these different facts, like pearls dissolve in vinegar, pineapple is a very big berry. But you have these elements that, yes, they might not make you smarter, but they do make you feel smarter than somebody else, and that's what's likely to get shared. You want to be the first person to break the news a lot of times. You want to be giving them insights. Yes? Right, so that quantification is another element that, hey, now I know something, and it's quantifiable, and it's unique. It's very specific. So it increases the remarkability if you have a specific number. Great point. Okay, and then insiders are kind of like one of the last things. Gmail, when they launched Gmail, how did you get a Gmail account? Yeah, somebody had to send you an invite, right? I don't know who the first people were that got the invites, but they started sending them. And once you got an invite, you could join Gmail. Well, that made it seem scarce, and that made it seem like you were an insider if you were there. That perceived scarcity comes to play in restaurants, for example. So the McRib doesn't come out very often. But when it does, that's a piece of social currency. Hey, did you know the McRib is back? We went down to Moab this spring, and the Shamrock Shake was out. And that's like a gross shake for anybody that likes it. It's kind of gross. But my wife does like it, and so she's like, Shamrock Shakes. I'm like, okay. So we pull in, and we get up to the counter, and the woman's like, we're actually out of Shamrock. So Shamrock is apparently now the ingredient that you put into Shamrock Shakes. So if you didn't ever drink it before, you won't drink it now. But the idea was, we know it's going to be here for a limited time period. Let's get it now, and then let's tell the people that we know like this to come and get it as well. So this scarcity and this insider feeling lead to that. Okay. Another element is triggers. So if I was to say to you, what gets shared more, Walt Disneyland or Honey Nut Cheerios? Disneyland, because it's way cooler, right? Cheerios are gross, and Disneyland is fun sometimes. This actually gets shared a lot more. Honey Nut Cheerios does. Obviously, I wouldn't present that example. That's why you didn't chime in. You're like, he's tricking us, which is kind of true. Honey Nut Cheerios gets this ongoing word of mouth. How often do you eat Honey Nut Cheerios if that's your cereal of choice? Every single day. And for some reason, as we talked about with Twitter, people post that they're eating their Honey Nut Cheerios, right? How often do you go to Disneyland? Like once every 4 years or maybe once every other year? You don't go there a lot. So you have this immediate word of mouth, which you might share, but then you have something that's sustained and you're present more often. And that's this idea of triggers. Hey, I'm encountering something. It makes me want to share something. So you look at some of these conceptual primes, which is essentially what these sensory triggers are. If you look at, they ran this study on trays. And the phrase, they went to so let's say that we went to Helaman Halls or the Cannon Center, because the Cannon Center is just some nugget that we just found out about in marketing. It's pretty awesome. It's not great food, but kind of nice. Let's say you have your tray, and we tell you over and over again, hey, here's a phrase that we want you to think about. We're testing this as a new slogan for the cafeteria. And one of them is, live the healthy way, eat 5 fruits and vegetables a day. And then the other one is, each and every Cannon Hall tray or Cannon Commons tray needs 5 fruits and veggies a day. So I give you that, and let's say I split the class in half, and I give you each one of those slogans. Who's going to ultimately lead to more consumption of fruits and vegetables? Which slogan? Second one. And the reason is because I've created now a trigger. Every time you pick up your tray, you think, oh, 5 fruits and vegetables. Whereas living the healthy way, how often do I think about living the healthy way? Probably not very often, but I've created now this trigger, this conceptual prime for you to do that. Works the same way when you're voting. So if you go into a voting booth in a school versus inside a church versus inside a fire station, the way that you vote is dictated largely by what's surrounding you and what primes are surrounding you. So education becomes increasingly important if I'm voting inside a school. Okay, things like that. If I asked you now, think of a candy bar, what candy bar would you say? First comes to mind. Snickers. Snickers and Kit Kat? Milky Way? Good. We're all getting hungry. These are lots of things that we're excited about. If I asked you like the week before Halloween, you all kind of converge, or at least the mentions converge more on Reese's, right? Why? Because everything in our environment is orange and black, and so we're having this reminder all the time. People would be thinking more about Orange Crush during Halloween than they would otherwise. So that's the idea here. And then Friday, you guys all remember Rebecca Black's Friday song, right? Really super obnoxious, but just like Gangnam Style, I'm going to be able to help you hear that song as well. When do people search for that song? Friday, because I see, oh, it's Friday. Oh, remember that awful Rebecca Black song? And then I'm going to search for it. Same thing happens. There's a Bone Thugs and Harmony song called First of the Month. Searches for that song go up on the first day of the month. So these are the peaks where people search. These are Friday peaks. I don't want to hear that anymore. It's pretty bad. Okay, here we have kind of this idea of if it's publicly observable, then I'm more likely to participate and I'm also more likely to share. So think about this social proof. If people like something, I'm more willing to take that initial step and say I like it too and then share it. If you go and you see that some post doesn't have any likes, you're like, why doesn't that have any likes? I don't want to share this with anyone. No one else likes this, so I don't want to be perceived as weird. So you wait for that social proof. Similarly, if you go to a new area, you don't want to go to a new city and then go to a restaurant that doesn't have any people in it, right? You want to go to the places where there's a line waiting out the door, even if it doesn't really go anywhere specifically. This idea of public observability comes into play with some of the marketing campaigns that you've seen. So like Movember. What is the purpose of Movember? What happens there? You guys heard of this? You see it at BYU a lot, yeah. Grow a mustache, why?
It's to draw awareness for cancer.
Yeah, so men's health, essentially, like broadly, but men's cancers, prostate cancers, more specifically as well. So you start seeing mustaches, and you're like, why is everyone growing a mustache? And it's to increase this awareness. This was started in Australia. You have here as well this sent from my iPhone, right? When I get an email, I don't know where someone's sending it from. But if you tell me it was sent from your iPhone, now I know, oh, there's iPhones out there. That's cool. If I'm launching this, I might want to be able to say, what is the medium or the way that you're getting this message across? Livestrong, the way that they chose that bright yellow wristband, right? That's a better color than black because you see it a lot more. It's something that stands out. Pink for breast cancer awareness is another example of that. It's not a color that we see in our environment all the time. So when you see NFL players wearing pink receiver gloves, you think, that's right, it's Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Okay. This can backfire as well. So Nancy Reagan, while her husband was president, one of the initiatives was let's decrease drug consumption. And so they launched this Say No to Drugs campaign. And one of the ads showed people walking down their normal lives in New York City, and there was a kid that they were following, and the kid would come up to somebody and like, hey, do you want some marijuana? And they're like, no. And then they'd go, hey, do you want some cocaine? And they said, no. And they kept going through all of these different scenarios saying, no, I don't want that. And so they're like, this is really great because it's going to tell people, like, you shouldn't be consuming drugs, you shouldn't be doing drugs, say no to drugs. But what happened was people used that as a signal that, oh, a lot of people are using drugs. Like, there's people that it's okay to smoke marijuana. Marijuana consumption actually increased following this Say No to Drugs campaign. You can look at attribution and see if it was necessarily from this, but they've kind of concluded that some of that increase was due to that. So that is public observability. And then we have practical value. So whereas social currency is all about me and how awesome I am, practical value is this is somewhat altruistic. I think you could use this piece of information. I know you're struggling right now with this part of your life. Here's a message that's going to brighten your day. It doesn't really reflect that great on me. It might give me a mental boost or an emotional boost, but it's really for the receiver. And what you see is a lot of items that are just like life hacks lump into this category, right? So one of them is shucking corn. So what's the worst part about shucking corn? Silk. Those hairs are awful because you can't ever get all of them off, right? So one day this Ken Craig, this farmer, was in his kitchen and they were having dinner, and his daughter-in-law was like, hey, the corn's ready. We can start making the corn. We can start shucking the corn. And he's like, oh, I have a better way to do that. So he ends up throwing 2 ears of corn into the microwave for 4 minutes, pulls it out, cuts off the stem, grabs the top of the corn husk, and the corn slides out. No silk, and it's cooked. And the woman was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. His daughter-in-law was like, we need to video this. So they video it. They ultimately post it to YouTube. Now it's over like 9 million views for how to shuck corn and eat it. This is practical value. There's nothing amazing about that, right? This doesn't have the remarkability that you would see with social currency. But it does have this, you could use this feel to it. And the more specific you are about the content that you encounter, the more value that it has. So Ben Ogles is here. His son lives across the street from me. Well, so does Ben, but his son did live across the street as well. And he played water polo. And any time I would come across water polo, I don't know anyone else in the world that played water polo besides him. So that had some value to him, not necessarily to me, but if there was information I could pass along, because it was specific, I ultimately ended up sharing that with him. So you have little things like this, right? These little life hacks where this is a toaster tipped to its side, and you can do a toasted cheeser, right? Or like a grilled cheese sandwich, just like that. Something kind of cool. It's not mind-blowing, but it has some practical value. You might want to try it, except for the underside will get toasted weirdly as well. Anyway, and then we have stories. Stories are things that we like to share because we get wrapped up in them. And we see their value, and it's fun to talk about them. It's cool to see these transformations. This is the Dove Evolution Campaign. Have you guys seen this before? Okay, so this is basically they took some woman from this starting phase, and they did makeup, they did a photo shoot, and then ultimately they doctored the photos in Photoshop, put it on a poster board or a billboard, and said, you know, let's focus on real beauty was the campaign that Dove has continued to move forward. This real beauty campaign, let's not buy into the images that were present. But a lot of people saw this and they thought, that really resonates with me. I like that story. And so it got a ton of shares, a ton of likes, tons of views because of that. One of the benefits of stories over other forms of communication or persuasion is that they're less likely to be counter-argued. Because it's easy to argue with facts, it's harder to argue with someone's perception of that story. And additionally, after you've gone through an elaborate story and you've kind of devoted resources to interpreting that story and understanding it, you have less resources left to persuade or to be persuaded by, yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the key elements here for engineering virality. I'm going to highlight some of Talas Deshura's work on just, this is not on how generally content gets shared. This is specific to viral videos and video ads and how they get shared, and really from a perspective of a company. What should you do? So there's some problem steps, and you can kind of see these come into play. The branding turns your viewers away. When you see an advertisement, as soon as you know that it's an ad, you're like, I'm not interested in this. But if you can pulse your brand throughout, if you just have little snippets of your brand, you're more likely to ultimately view the ad. People get bored early, which happens a lot. Start with something really in your face, really exciting, get them to be joyful or surprised. If people are watching it and they're not going all the way to the end, you need to take them on this emotional roller coaster. So there's this idea of hedonic adaptation, right? And the idea is that I get used to something over time, but if you take it away and then you give it back, I like it again. But if you take it away and give it back, so it's this idea of an emotional roller coaster. If you stay here, that's not as good as if you're going like this, right? Because you want to bring me back up to that level. And then ultimately, if people like an ad, so you've done all your work, people like an ad, but they're not sharing it, one of the reasons is it might be uncomfortable to share. So they like it, but I don't want people knowing that I like this ad. So there was a spot for a beer company where they did a swear jar. And this was like the office. They would go into the office, and there was a jar that said, hey, if you swear, you got to put money in, but all the money that we put into this goes to Bud Light. So what happens is the rest of the commercials, everybody's just swearing and throwing money into this jar so that like they could go buy more Bud Light. What happens is that ad actually did really well. So they said, let's take this to the next level. Let's do another one and try and capitalize on this success. So they did one where it was basically a clothing donation. So every item of clothing that you donated, you got to get more Bud Light. Well, what ended up happening, obviously, by the end of the commercial, is even though it was censored, is a bunch of naked people walking around, right? This is an advertisement that maybe individually people think is clever and funny because it's building on the same concepts that were successful prior, but I'm not sharing that with anyone, right? I don't want you to see that. I don't want you to know that I saw that, and it's not something that I'm proud of. So if you see that, if you see surprise but not shock, just make it more comfortable for people to share. And then ultimately, and this is kind of what I wanted to conclude with, A lot of times we see viral videos and say, wow, that's so successful and it's so organic that people just posted the video and then it got like 5 million views. Like, how awesome was that? That is the exception, not the rule. There are groups of influencers that you pay to get your message to go out. And there are agencies that focus on, hey, let's have this core group of influencers and let's make sure that we have good relationships with them so that when our clients want to push content forth, we have that relationship more than others. So Mechanism is one that has done this really well, the agency Mechanism. But you end up looking at it and it costs almost the same amount of money as a TV spot when you're looking at a cost per thousand. But when you ultimately look at the level of engagement and the time that they spend with your brand, that's where the viral video starts to shine. Financial Times just had this past week, a validation of their metric, which they use is engagement per hour, basically cost per hour of engagement. And that's really what we're seeing this transition to. Now that the media are out there, we're seeing how much are they engaging with. It's not the same just to see do people see it, but are they likely to share it? Are they likely to engage with this brand? So I'm assuming since my other videos didn't work, this one's not going to work either.
Let's observe the effect of Evian on your body.
Which it doesn't. Look it up. It's that little kid and they're like roller skating to Rapper's Delight. It's kind of bizarre, but kind of cool at the same time. So with that, thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm not sure of the format in particular, but I think we have probably like a couple minutes for some questions. Is that true?
Yes, and they do ask if you want to ask a question. There's a mic over there. Just step in.
That's a deterrent.
We gotta go to the mic.
Yeah. We should have this like fast and testimony meeting in our ward where someone walks through with the microphones. Just need more deacons to attend BYU.
Okay, so I guess some of my
I don't think that mic's live.
in that case, doesn't matter. Some of my questions are like, for example, I'm not in the business school,
Uh-huh.
but I would really like to learn more about this and find out as much information as I can. Do you have any sources or places where those sorts of things would be listed? Are there any other places where we could find forums like this?
Forums, I don't know, but in terms of the content, I don't know. Do I post my slides from this or no? I can send me an email. I'll send you all of where I got all this information. It's all cited at the bottom, but a good place to start, Talis Teixeira at Harvard is kind of doing this from a quantitative marketing side. Does a lot of studies with that physiological behavior, eye tracking, and those types of things. He's a good place to start. Jonah Berger has kind of carved out a niche within the consumer behavior side.
Talk a little bit afterwards.
Absolutely, sure, sure. But yeah, there's a lot of awesome sources for that. It's an emerging area, so staying on top of it is relatively easy once you know the key sources that feed into the new material. Danny?
So the picture you had of the line of people reminded me of Utah Valley, and it's whenever I see like a new place open here, I don't even want to go to it because Chipotle right now is like a 2-hour wait. Is there something about us and our culture here that makes us like sense scarcity more than places, other places? IKEA for the first year it's open is just swamped. And I think it's kind of a little bit of a local phenomenon. I'm wondering if you're
I would
about-
say it might be a local phenomenon, but it also might be a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
And the fact that our social networks, those of us who are in the LDS church, our social network collapses really quickly. So the people I go to work with might be the people that I go to church with, might be my friends outside of work. And because of that, this communication just kind of cycles back through, and maybe it's a reinforcement of that. I don't know. That's a good question. You also do have the flip side of this too, though, and this happened with the Livestrong wristbands. Similar to your point, it might not just be that you don't want to wait in line, but you might want to actively diverge from the other consumers, right? That those aren't cool anymore. Chipotle's not cool, even though it came open like a month ago. Everybody's going there, so I'm going to go somewhere else. So I think you do have individual characteristics where you will want to be different from the group, for sure. It's a great question. Simon.
Ryan, could you talk a little bit on convenience? So for instance, Facebook right now, they're playing around with this dislike button.
So people don't have to write, I don't like this, right? So what role does convenience play in this type of lecture?
So you see this with, the idea with convenience and looking at the flip side is called friction. And it's this idea that if I put up any barriers between you and the ultimate outcome, you're likely to not participate. You see this in an online framework a lot where, let's say that you really want to buy this product and you put it into your shopping cart and then you make me go through 5 steps before I can buy it. I'm going to abandon that shopping cart. So the convenience is a reduction of friction. So if I'm Facebook and I say I want to be able to maybe have a sentiment analysis, which is maybe where they're going with this, what is the valence of these different posts? Then I want to make that easy enough so that I can get the data to support that. So I think convenience is really a reduction of friction, is how I would phrase that.
Just a quick follow-up. Do you see businesses winning in the marketplace over that concept of convenience?
Yeah, I mean, the one-click button on Amazon is an example of that, right? The ability for me to, another one is just on your iPhones. Now the fact that my thumbprint replaces my password when I buy something on iTunes, right? For me, my password takes forever to type in because I'm using numbers and capital letters like I'm supposed to do. But if all I have to do is hold my thumb there for 2 seconds, that's a reduction of friction. It means I'm more likely to follow through with that process. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes?
So I represent the social media team for Mormon Insights, which is a magazine online that we do, and we basically are creating unique content to direct people to LDS resources.
Mm-hmm.
So how do these principles apply? Because we're not a market or a brand, and we have a kind of specific audience, which is the LDS audience. How can we apply these principles that you talked about, you know, when the businesses, the state company post things about other things? How does that apply to us?
So I guess I would kind of push back on that first point that you aren't a company or you aren't a brand. You might not be a LLC, but you're a brand, right? So these principles should largely hold to the same extent because if I'm a person and I'm sharing this content, it's the same as if a company is sharing this content. I want it to resonate with my end consumer. I want them to find that there's value in there. You're talking about let's take content and then get them to another step. Right? That's creating meaningful enough content that maybe has these emotional connections that they're likely to take that next step. So it's in a broader framework than this. It falls largely into a persuasive framework. And how likely are you to be persuaded to act on this message? And your objective is to get them to go from one stimulus to another area. If you're going to be doing that, then it's a little bit broader. It's not just social media concepts, but there's more attitudes and persuasion, and how do I push you into that route? So I think largely a lot of these apply. Short answer is that there's a lot more increased complexity to the answer that I could probably give you now, but I'd love to talk offline.
Yeah, can I ask one short
Sure.
follow-up? So like the example you gave of state company posting about other topics that are interesting to
Mm-hmm.
their audience.
Yeah.
How broad do you think we need to go? Are we going to lose people if we are too focused on our specific purpose and not engaging them in other content outside?
Absolutely. Yeah, well, it depends on the relationship that you already have with your existing consumer base. But nobody wants to hear a hard sell all the time. What you're trying to do with this type of content is share a common ground. You're building a relationship with them. And nobody builds a relationship by speaking all the time. You have to listen. You have to find out what the things are that are important to them, and then show that we are similar, because I like that stuff too. So you might be able to have a slant that says, we like this stuff, but specifically within our domain, we like this stuff. And then you can kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. But largely, you got to build that relationship first before you start making these. Be much more interactive. And this is a great opportunity to get feedback, right? Because consumers want to talk. So if you pose a question online and say, hey, what should I be doing better? They'll tell you. You might not want to hear all the things that they tell you, but they'll tell you what they think you should do. Yes?
So kind of like that line, the line of people.
Yeah.
It kind of runs the same way with social media and how like gathering followers.
Mm-hmm.
But with like the trends of how Facebook and Twitter are going, where they want you to promote instead of just to put content out there.
Yeah.
So just to try to get more followers
Well, I think if you're looking at it from a company's perspective, generating more followers or getting more followers is a combination of all of the different media that you have. So this isn't just, I have an online presence. This is, how does the rest of my marketing campaign interact to generate these followers? So maybe there's a way that less obtrusively or maybe more targeted, you would be able to get them through an online campaign that's not social, or maybe you could get them through TV. So there are other avenues to get those initial likes or followers. Did you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, so like for an NGO or an NPO,
Mhm.
it's more about the media contact outside of the institution than what you're creating in and of itself.
Ye-
In some ways.
In some ways, yeah. I mean, it's a more nuanced answer than that, but largely. I think you could say largely that's true. Okay, I'm out of time, I assume. Thank you, I really appreciate